All right. All right. So I'm going to turn my volume up a little bit. So glad to see you all. This is like I got to tell you all, like, in my head, I like this has been a dream. Like, I wouldn't say like when I go to sleep, but when you're driving in your car, you're at the grocery store, or you're whatever, you have these open visions of what something might look like when you get people you know and you love and you did life with them, get them together in a virtual space like this. So this has kind of been in my head for a while, and I'm like, how am I going to do that? And I'm like, all it takes is to send some messages. So I want to welcome you both here. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I'm just going to provide this just little brief overview. We are here today because this is the 28th of March and we're rounding out Women's History Month. And I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for two people who I know and love, and I've done life with them, and they're not off in some other galaxy. Like, they're real people doing the real work, brilliant women. And so I thought it would be really honorable to bring them in this virtual space here and talk about life, because they're not 50 years ago, they're not 100 years ago, but they are women who should be honored and respected during Women's History Month. So we're going to start out by having them introduce themselves, and then we're going to move on from there. All right. Kim, you can go first, and then Tiffany.
Wow. Okay. Where do I start? I'll keep it simple, because I'm sure we'll get into more details about how life be lifing a little bit later. But so Kimberly Fuqua, if you're looking for me on any of the socials, LinkedIn specifically. But I am. I don't. I guess I can start with my age. I hope that doesn't bother you, Chiquita or Tiffany, if you like my mama, who doesn't like to talk about her age. But have known Chiquita and Tiffany. We were talking, Tiffany, this almost 40 years since we started University of Illinois in 1987, which is just incredible to me. So you guys can figure out how old I am from there. But I am a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, all those things. I currently reside in the Netherlands, right outside of Amsterdam, but I grew up in Chi-Town. I'm a Chicago girl. I always tell people that, even though I spent 25 years in North Carolina, living life. And that was, yeah, it feels like a whole different life, actually. But that is where I think in North Carolina, where I really started to, live my adult life. And we can get into more later, but I have worked at Microsoft now for almost 30 years. I have two children. My daughter Rachel, who lives in Colorado, my son Alan, who passed away 10 years ago at the age of 14. But I always talk about my two kids because they are my two kids. And currently, I reside in Netherlands, like I said. I work as director of customer experience for Microsoft, but more importantly, and I think that's where we'll go in this conversation, I am really figuring out the purpose. Like you talked about priorities, Chiquita, I'm figuring out what my priorities now are now beyond just working in corporate or being a wife and mother. I'm still all those things, but I'm really figuring out who Kimberly Fuqua is, and what I have to bring to this world other than just helping a big company make some more money. Uh, so that's where I am right now in my life. I have a company I call Luminous Leaders, and I go to different corporate organizations and I provide workshop services to help people know how to not only find their voice, but use their voice in a way that makes sure they're seen, heard, and valued. Because I think that's something that, especially early in career or early in profession, folks struggle with, and also mid career and executive level. So I work at all levels, but I really focus in on that early and mid career because I think if you can start to do it at a younger time in your life, then by the time you get to where we are, having worked for 30, 35 years, you'll be at a level that can provide even more impact, and hopefully you can help others. So I'm helping people now so that they can really understand their talent potential, and then take that to help others in the future. And of course, I focus on women of color because I think that that is a group of people that has so much to say and gets so underestimated. And I'm tired of that, to be honest. So, yeah, so that's what I'm doing right now. It wasn't maybe the most succinct introduction, but you get a little bit of flavor of where I am in my life and what's important to me. So, hello, everyone.
Well, hello there. I'm Tiffany Ferguson. I'm so delighted to be here and to be here with Kimberly and with Chiquita, who we met our freshman year in college. That's how I know Chiquita and Kimberly. I am from Chicago, the south side of Chicago, born and raised. That is where I reside now. I majored in English literature in college. And I spent most of my time as an English literature major studying 18th century English poets. And while that might seem disconnected from what I do today, it laid the foundation for a lot of what I end up doing as a lawyer, and that's my job. I'm vice president of labor and employment for Allstate Insurance Company, which is also based in Chicago with operations around the world. And in that role, I advise, and the team I lead advises on workplace issues for all 54,000 of our employees across the globe. And so prior to this role, so I've been at Allstate 10 years. Prior to that, I was in private practice. I was a partner at a boutique litigation law firm in Chicago, and I did that work for about 20 years, variations of that work. And then now I'm sort of in a second career but working for a corporation as a lawyer, but advising just one client. Whereas before I had several clients, I advised them on several issues and litigated issues on their behalf. Um, Now I'm really focused to just kind of tap into what Kimberly is saying. Now I'm really focused when I'm not working all the time for Allstate. I'm focused on helping young people figure out their next step. So I started a program at my law school. I went to the University of Iowa College of Law for law school, and I started a program at my law school that connects alumni with students. And it's been functioning for 30 years because I've been out of law school that long now. And so that program is still running at my law school. And what I've learned over the years is that I need to start younger because despite the fact that when I applied to law school, I applied literally on a typewriter. I had to rent a typewriter, right? Because this is the beginning of the internet. And you could not just, there were no web browsers really at that time, which is hard to imagine. But I had to rent a typewriter, type out my applications, which I received via mail, and then send them out and get information and then read the information and then figure out what I wanted to do. And now you have ChatGPT and Claude and all these things where you could just find this out in 5 minutes. But despite that, um, I'm finding that young people are not doing that. And so I'm starting earlier. So now I'm working with some folks in college who are interested in law school and graduate school. But it's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to have this conversation, and happy Women's History Month.
Wow. The typewriter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
Oh, that took me back. Yeah, the typewriter. Yeah, and the whiteout. Yeah. So that just goes to show you we've been you had me thinking about access to all the AI tools now, and some of them I think are a little better than others, but the fact that it can spit out all this information and write things and letters and essays and all of this. And I was talking to a colleague the other day. I said I was looking at something 20 years ago that I happened to have saved on I ended up transferring that. I printed it all out because I didn't have the floppy disk, but I was looking at some papers that I wrote and I was like, wow, the time that it took me to write these papers using the same type of language, this AI stuff can spit this out in just, in no time. I'm like, that is the work, having the mental capacity to come up with that. Of course, there was a lot of processing, but you took me back to that when I had that conversation with her yesterday. So I always have to affirm myself and say, you know what? Yeah, I was back when we didn't have all of that. So I still have it. And that means that I can probably use the AI tools a little better, because I have the language and the vocabulary and I can tell it to do. I'm smarter than you, Chatty. I'm smarter than you, Chatty. I'm gonna tell you what to do. So I'm so glad to have you all here. I want to take a walk down memory lane though, because I want to start at college. And I want you to talk a little bit about your experience in college, making that transition from high school to college. What did you see? Maybe the top things, the top 2 to 3 things that were different from you that you had to adjust to, that helped you, kind of really say to yourself, this is something that's different. And what strategies that you use to kind of navigate yourself as much as possible successfully through the academic part, the personal part, this especially the social part, because we went to a pretty big campus. There's a lot going on, right? So just talk to us about, the trend when you made that transition from high school to college, things that were challenging, like maybe your top 2 to 3 things that were challenging for you, and what kind of strategies you pulled from, or what was your safe space for you to be able to navigate successfully. And anyone can start with that.
I can go. Kim, did you want to go?
Yeah, I was trying to get off mute. My bad.
All right.
But you go right ahead, Tiffany.
The two things that come to mind are, and again, transition from high school to college is one, I went to an all-girl high school. I spent 3 years at that school. I did 1 year, which is a tangent, at a school in Louisiana, but 3 years of my high school education was with all girls. And so I was going into a co-ed environment. So that was new, to transition to that. The other thing is, no one was responsible for me. So I could go to class, not go to class, do my work, not do my work, but no one was going to be checking or paying attention to what I was doing at the dining room table to make sure that everything was in order. So there was no parent, there was nobody in charge of me. So those were the two biggest things that come to mind. What is it for you, Kim?
Can you hear me? Sorry
Yes.
about that. Whenever I want to hit get off mute, I can't ever get off of it. But I, very similar. I think for me, what the biggest challenge was I went from when I was 13. So I lived on the south side of Chicago in a predominantly black neighborhood until I was 13. Went to Whitney Young, and then which was predominantly black, but still more diverse. And then my parents decided to move us to Naperville. And in 1983, moving to Naperville, there's not many people that look like us. So that was quite a culture shock for me, to go from an all black neighborhood to going to high school. And that was another thing too, because by the time you get to high school, a lot of times people have already gone to middle school or to the K-8 school together. So they had relationships. So not only did I have to deal with that fact that I was coming in as an outsider to people who had already been friends for many years, but then I was coming as a black girl. And I remember I always tell this story to help people understand what it was like in that neighborhood. So when we first moved in, there was a young lady my age across the street, who said to me, wow, it's so nice that you guys are here. You guys must be special black people. And I was like, special black people? Like, what does that mean? Like, what? No, we're not that special. Not according to my mom and dad. We're just regular black people working hard. But, she said, yeah, because only special black people would be allowed to come here, from inner city of Chicago. You guys must have come from the projects. They just had no clue how to interact with people not like them. So I'm bringing that up to say when I was going to University of Illinois and I saw that there was a Black community there, even though it was small compared to the rest of the very large organization. If I recall correctly, I think U of I had like 25,000, 30,000 students. I can't remember exactly. And I think the number of Black students were somewhere around 4 or 5,000. But to me, that was a lot. I was like, oh, I get to be back with some Black. So I was excited about that piece. I think the harder part for me was I did not have as much discipline because high school was easy for me for the most part. And then to me, it was a very hard transition to go from, as Tiffany said, like you don't have anybody telling you what to do and when to do it, but also the work was harder for me. You had to study. You had to make sure you're ready for exams. You had to write papers. You had to do research and things like that. And I had to do some of that in high school, but not to the level that I had to do it at U of I. So that was a big challenge, but at the same time, I was super happy about being able to be around my people, again. And then having experienced what I experienced in Naperville, because not only being the only one, but you always have ignorant people, even with educated folks. You have ignorance, if you know what I mean. You have people who, especially when it comes to racism, so having been called, the N word and people talking about my hair and how strange it looked and things like that. So it was somewhat of a comforting feeling to go somewhere where now I saw people that look like me again. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's good. Like every you all have to now you got to remember we haven't been together like this. I think all of us, if I'm going to be quite honest, it was Tiffany's birthday. Is that the last time we were all together?
I remember
Tiffany,
2011 and being in Chicago. That's
when
what I
I
Yeah,
remember.
I know it's over a decade ago.
yeah,
Yeah, so
okay.
that
So
sounds
I
right.
just yeah, it's been a while, but as you talk the one thing that I'm thinking about, Kim, when you say that, the fact that we did go to a PWI, right? So,
Right.
but within the PWI, we were able to kind of like carve our niche. We knew
Sure.
that these were safe spaces for us. So even though you're on this campus, it's got 35,000, and we were told when you see a black face, you speak. So even though we didn't, know every black person, I remember once one of my classmates, we were walking from one side of town to the other because I think in my cohort, when I graduated in education, and it was elementary education, there was one other black person in education at the
Mhm.
time, which means that all of
Wow.
my classes, most of the time, I was the only black person. So everybody knew me. But the
Yeah.
funny part was that when I would walk across a campus with someone and I would see a black person, all the white girls or they were like, everybody, not picking up on like all the people that I'm talking to, they're black.
I'm
Like,
Black.
so I
Yeah.
don't know everybody, right? They just happen to be black. But I think that's an important thing to note that you kind of carve yourself out, you find out
Yes.
where you want your hub to be. And
Yeah.
also, I would be remiss if I didn't say, I always felt this way when I met you all. Because Kim, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. Weren't you like a national merit or national, weren't you? Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, like when I met you all and Tiffany, like I remember, you telling me about your experience in terms of how the it wasn't lining up. You told me about your GPA, but you also told me about what you earned on the ACT. And I was like, wow, how can that be? So, for me, when
Yes.
I'm carving out who I want to be with, I'm like, I want to be with the smart girls, right? I want to be in the room with the smart girls. And so these are things that I always thought about when, you're trying to find out who you want your friendships and lasting friendships, not just something for a semester. But now that we're thinking about that and going back down memory lane, can you speak to like it can be an experience, something that's memorable for you when you maybe said in your head, okay, this is what advocacy looks like. This is what leadership looks like. This is what social justice or really thinking about how I can contribute to the community, how I can use my skill set, use my empathy, use the parts of myself to contribute to something that's larger than myself. So, again, leadership, advocacy, doing the community work. Can you think of any during your time there on the campus, in a memorable experience when you said, aha, this is what that looks like. It looks like this. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to start because there's something else that just for people who are listening who are not in the US, because I might have some people in Europe, in the Netherlands might listen. PWI means predominantly white institution, just so for people who might not know that. If they go back and I know they're not on right now, but if they go back and listen, I want to make sure they know what that is. But just really quickly, for me, I remembered this when I was looking at the questions and we were talking about, doing this, Chiquita. I started to try to go back in my head because, again, to go back 4 years after all that's happened, it's not easy. But I do remember that, and I'm not sure if you told me or Tiffany or somebody else, but told me about the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I remember reading that book, and it touched me so much on so many different angles. I mean, there were things that I just didn't understand, because I never experienced it, like how he grew up and, some of the very overt racism that he and his family experienced as he was growing up. I mean, really throughout his life, but I'm talking about at a young age, what he experienced. And so I could relate to some of that. And then he talked about, of course, he talked about his, his criminal record and just his whole transformation. And then all the way up to the end, when he starts talking about understanding, having gone on the pilgrimage, the Mecca pilgrimage, and understanding that humans are humans and that I'm meeting people who are Muslim who have blue eyes and blonde hair, and just that understanding. He started to really understand that it's more about humanity than it is about color and ethnicity. Even though color and ethnicity, yes, they have, absolutely, it has, obviously we're socialized and it's institutionalized. Racism, has such a big impact on our lives. But if you could get past all that, if at one point in humanity we could evolve and get past all that, it comes down to the fact that we are all humans. We are human. I heard somebody the other day say, we're not just human beings, we're human doings. We should be human doings. So I hope that's what that book, I think, meant to me, was that this was somebody that was a human doing and that he gave his life being a human doing. So that was a trigger. And then I was also thinking about all the different people that I found out about from a activist standpoint that I didn't know about, like Francis Krauss Welsing and Stokely Carmichael, and I don't know. I can name a few others. You guys could probably name more. So that to me had been somewhat hidden from me. It's interesting because my parents. I'll say this last thing and then I'll stop. But my parents were from the civil rights era, because my mom grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. She was 8 years old when the boycott happened, the Montgomery bus boycott. So she remembers all that. My dad grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. So he had I think one of the young ladies that was killed in the church bombing he went to school with and knew. So these are parents who had that kind of history. But it was almost like they knew all about the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks and all of that. But the part about the people like Francis Cress Welsing, and they didn't know those folks. It was like the after the 60s, if you will. And I think by that time they had gotten into living their own lives and raising kids and things like that. So it was a piece of history of civil rights activism that I was exposed to that I never had before. And to me, that let me know kind of what we're doing today, that this is a continuum. It's not a one and done. It's not something that happened 67 years, 70 years ago, and now we're all good. This is something that has to be on a continuum, and it is on a continuum. And it's time to keep talking about, like we're doing, Chiquita, the people who are doing the work, who continue to do the work, and hopefully will encourage the next set of people to do the work. So that was my memorable moment. Autobiography of Malcolm X, and learning about people who I didn't even know were out there being activists on my behalf.
It's hard for me to think of a single moment. As Kim is saying, this was a long time ago. So it's hard for me to think. But so I'll put it in two buckets. I remember being activated just on in two fronts. In terms of socially with friendship, I remember meeting Chiquita for the first time, and or at least I believe this was first time. It might have been in the early few days, and we were talking about Maya Angelou, and I was just so delighted to meet somebody else who was a girl like me. I mean, I'm 17 at this point, right? I was like, oh, she knows about Maya Angelou. And so I was like, oh, I could have a friend that is reading the same things that I'm reading, which I had never experienced before. And so I was activated in friendship, right? So I was like, oh wow, this is like a place where this is one person who, that's right. And we went to see her, and I was like, there might be other people who also read things like Maya Angelou at this place. And so
Who
I
also
was
read.
right. First read,
You're right.
and then read Maya Angelou and other people, Toni Morrison, and other people that I was reading, right? So I was activated and motivated to interact with more people like that. So there was that bucket. The other bucket, I just remember wanting to and feeling a need to speak up about a variety of issues, and it being and feeling activated, right, motivated to speak up about many issues that I was, passionate about at the time, some of which I'm still passionate about. But you learn and you grow. But that's what I felt an urgency about. Something has to be said. Somebody has to say something. Something has to be said. And I've probably always had that, like, a need to, like, now wait, now somebody needs to address this. So that's what I really remember, is being activated by those things. And it's interesting that Kim is talking about kind of there being a gap. My parents are Both my parents are now deceased, but my mom was a baby boomer. My dad was a silent generation. And my mom went to the March on Washington when she was 16. She
Mm.
was living in upstate New York, and her mother had remarried, and her stepfather took her to the March on Washington. And it's very interesting just in terms of context, because I think context and perspective is like probably one of the most valuable things adults can provide to young people. And when I remember asking her about it, and she said, well, at the time, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew we were going on a road trip to DC. And my stepfather was like, I'm going to this thing. And nobody else wanted to go. And I was like, well, sure, I'll go. She said it was not, at the time, I did not realize that I was being involved or participating in history and what became this huge, huge historic event. Interestingly, and I was not preparing for this talk, I was just looking for things from my mother last night. And she wrote a little short story about it that I had forgotten she had emailed me. And so I found that in my email last night and just trying to find things that she had written. And so, but that provided some context in terms of, which is what, I'd like to do today, is to provide some context to some of the young people that might listen to this. Is it provided me a perspective of how she experienced it as a teenager, right? That she was going along for the ride. There was this adult with some sense who was like, I think we need to be at this. I'm not sure what it's all going to be either, but this seems really important. And I'm making the effort to drive and take my stepdaughter to this thing, and so that we can be there in person for this event.
That's good. Really good. This is rich, which tells me that we've been away for too long because that's what we do.
Yes.
when we get together, we start talking. It's like, but really
Can
good.
I just emphasize something
Yeah.
before you ask it? I have to say this, talk about context. So, I look back now and I go, wow, I was really hanging around some smart people. And Tiffany said this, that you just want, she was intentional about hanging around smart people. I think I just lucked out, and I wasn't intentional. So those two things about being around smart black women, and I think part of that is because, I see my mom is a very smart black woman. I had all these smart black women in my family. And so you're kind of drawn to that because that is what you grow up in. That is what you're used to. That's what you know. That's what you're familiar with. And so you gravitate to what you're familiar with. But also the speaking out part, because I don't know if Chiquita and Tiffany know, but if you guys remember, I'm sure you heard my dad say it. He always thought I should be an attorney. And I thought, that's Tiffany. That's not me. But he was like, yeah, but your mouth is so big. You always got something to say, And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to use it in a different way. But it's just interesting the things you said, Tiffany, because I can completely relate to that. You were being intentional. I just happened to fall into hanging out with such intelligent, caring, empathetic, kind, women. So I'm thankful for that, for having, because I'm sure that knowing the two of you and others that we knew really informs who I am today. And we can talk about more
It's
of that
true.
later. But I just had to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is important. And while you say intentional, I think you were because in life you are what do people often say? In life, your decisions make your life, and in life you will make decisions. So the
Yeah.
choices that you make really amount to who you become in terms of your character, in terms of, what you plan to do. And so that you made decisions. So those were intentional decisions. So even though you may not have verbalized and it said, I'm going to be around this, you didn't have that, you may not have said it aloud, but you had those internal conversations. And you showed up in those spaces where there were people who were like-minded individuals. Even if you may
Yeah.
not have known a lot about them, you still made the decision to show up and be in that. And so I think
True.
which leads me to all of us, I think, said landed on this part about literacy, the
Mm,
importance of being literate um in terms of transforming the way that you think. And you cannot transform the way you think without being aware of that there's a way we communicate. We
Mm.
use an alphabetic system, and those syllables make words, those words make paragraphs, and they all have meaning to them. And so I think in both cases, you Tiffany, leading with literature, right? And some people will put that off in a space and say, oh, that's just the arts, right? Not thinking the arts, there's something, there's a philosophy to it. There's a theoretical framework to it because it changes the way you move and breathe in life, right? You reading a poem can change your world.
mhm.
Right, it's not just reading a poem. It's more than flowery language. It can really change the way you think. And you, Kim, saying that about the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I do remember that. I remember that being, when we had our book club, our study group, right? So I want to pivot a little bit and have you think about yourself, because I see it that way, and maybe you didn't at the time. And I want to use this word leadership. So I want you to think about your college days and what you thought about leadership, and if you saw yourself as a leader, and if so, um, what what kind of skill set do you believe you had, even if you were one of those leaders who were not out there out in the open? And sometimes we can lead from within. But how did you work your way into leadership? Maybe one, defining leadership, and then how did you see yourself as a leader on campus?
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm.
I think that, my understanding of leadership has evolved, right? So I think at that time, part of being a leader was being willing to speak up about issues, being willing to be the voice, being willing to take positions on issues. The the other part of it was in doing the speaking up, being able to motivate people, persuade people to do the same. And I think that the core part of it that carries through to today is that a lot of being a leader, whether that's in business as I am now or in other domains, um, that that you might find yourself in, right, is that you have to be able to inspire others for whatever the objective is. And that can seem like a big ask. I remember when I first started to think of it that way, particularly in business, I was like, that seems like kind of crazy, like inspire people. Like I'm not a minister or priest. I'm not, how am I inspiring people? And this is at work. And so it's like, how are we being inspirational in this context? But that really is what it is that you're finding a way to inspire others for an objective. And I did not realize that at the time when I was a young person in college. I was willing to speak, and through speaking, ended up inspiring other people and motivating people to do things. But I didn't put those things together immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say first of all, I had no clue what a leader was. When I was in, I shouldn't say that. I didn't have maybe language for it back then because, of course, again, if you putting things in context, leader to me was people who were, as Tiffany said, a minister in church. I was brought up in a very religious household, so it was seen as you were seen as successful if you did well in school, went on to get a great job, some corporate job. I mean, my parents were very clear about that, or be a teacher or an engineer or an attorney. And then if were also standing up in church and doing things as a Sunday school teacher or wife, wife of an elder or a preacher. So I was, yeah, I was kind of brought up in a very somewhat conservative African American household, except for the fact that my dad thought that women could do everything that men can do and better. Like I never, I'm so thankful that that part of his conservatism wasn't there. He was very liberal when it came to women doing a lot of great things. So my vision of a leader back then was that. I think going to college, going to university, again, you see different versions of it. You see people being a leader when it came to like being the head of, what do we call our African American the not the club, but you guys have to help me. We had like a
We had Nia. Is that what you mean? Like the study
NIA.
before you were talking about the Black student government. We're
Black
talking
student
about,
government, that's what
yeah.
I'm thinking
Mhm.
about. So we had people who were leaders of that. We had people who were leaders of the Divine Nine, of the Greek organization. And then we had people, I think about you and Tiffany, Chiquita, being a part of the Womanist Society. Did you guys start the Womanist Society? Did you start that?
That
Yes?
was Tiffany.
Tiffany, I remember. Yeah, I couldn't. Again, it's a long time ago, but
Yeah.
that's what I was remembering. And you know what's interesting about that? You all started that, and then my daughter came home from University of North Carolina one day and said, "Hey, Mom, I just joined the Womanist Society." I was like, "Womanist Society?
Like, what's going
That's
on here?
yeah, talk about throwback." Like I didn't even realize, that 30 something years later still
Mhm.
going in spaces, especially in universities. So my idea of a leader definitely transformed from what I thought was being somebody who was seen in church and seen in corporate and maybe
Mhm.
seen in the neighborhood to somebody who could start something new, who could start a community of people, for support, to really understand what it meant, to start to work on gender equity. I mean, we think gender equity is piss poor now, pardon my French. I mean, think about 40 years ago. I mean, I don't know about
Mhm.
you guys, but I don't remember having a lot of women professors. I remember, Chiquita, we had the Ollie Watts Davis, who
Mhm.
was led the Black Chorus, and I remember a lady, doctor. I can't remember her name right now. Maybe you guys do. She was a sociologist, doctor of
Oh,
sociology.
yeah. Yeah, because I think she came from Northwestern. She did like,
Yeah,
yeah, she did social, like Social 100 or something like that.
yeah,
I
I
want to say her
remember
last name was
those.
Sampson, Dr. Sampson or something like that. But she had a brother, I believe, who was also a professor there. I hope I'm not getting it mixed up. But yeah, yeah.
So I started to see those types of people as leaders. I mean, I was so impressed with Dr. Ollie West Davis because I think she was like 30 something, Chiquita. And she's still around. Do you know that? She's still around doing it.
Around.
She's still leading Black
That
Horse. I
woman
saw
was
it on
bad.
Spotify. I was like, oh, that was a mind blower. So it was definitely, as you say, Tiffany, like, it was a long time ago, but I can remember that my brain started to make different neural connections when it came to understanding what a leader is and what leadership looks like. And then I think it's been understanding that leadership can look like so many different things. That's been a red thread that's taken me here. It's actually brought me here to the Netherlands, and we can talk. I'm not going to keep going on about that piece, but definitely it's a matter of understanding that things change and your brain changes, hopefully. And if you're curious, if you stay curious and you continue to be a learner, you will start to broaden your understanding of what leadership looks like and what you can be as a leader as well.
That's good. Yeah, that is good. And I'm glad you both brought that up because that is so true that you all were very blessed to be in households where your father advocated for you. Like your fathers really encouraged you. Your fathers they didn't have these archaic views or stereotypical views of what a woman could and could not do. And I mean, I'm sure somebody has some study out there to talk about the importance of having a father's support, especially if you may go into something that's a non-conventional feminine type of career, whatever you want to call it. But I think that's really important, that part right there about having that in your household, because certainly we can say that mothers are supporting their daughters, you're close, you talk to them. But it's another thing when you have a father who says, I know we live in this type of society, but I'm going to tell you because you're mine, and I'm going to undergird you and support you in every way possible to be the best you can be. And I think that's what, Kim, when we talk about the womanist circle, I think when I look back on it now, I think people thought they thought that was just really radical. Like it thought it was a radical thing, but I think at the time, um, like Tiffany and I were just, I think about that now. We were just going from dorm to dorm. We just wanted to provide a safe space for young women to come together to talk about themselves and how to support one another. But certainly the gathering of young women where the focus is about young women, how dare you? Dare you? How dare you want to talk about yourselves? How dare you? But I think that people thought that that was something radical. The woman is sort of like, what do you mean? Or to be able to speak up for yourself when you felt like someone was really trying to diminish you or someone was trying to suppress you and oppress you, to use your voice and to use your mind, to think about that. And I'm positive um, that had a profound impact in my life moving forward because, I have four daughters. Oh my God. Right? So I don't know. It certainly came out in the wash. Like I was building you for something, right?
Exactly.
For such a time
He
as
was
this.
preparing you,
You did
the,
not
the
know, but
creator.
you're gonna need
Yeah.
all those workshops and all that stuff for they're coming forth. But I think that that was really important. Now that I look back on it now, and I'm like, it probably was seen for people as being radical. Like you're walking around and you got the nerve, you have the audacity to center yourself. Like, really? Come on. So I think that's what we were really endeavoring to do. But I do want to pivot a little bit because I want to talk about moving from college and pivoting and moving on to the corporate world, and what that has been like for you. Of course, my experience is different. I'm in education and people in education. I have Dr. Yolanda Stewart is on now. She's one of my colleague, and she does a lot of work in our district, but she does a lot of work in the community, lots and lots of work in our district and in the community. And she does a lot of advocacy work and just a lot. But I know that corporate moves a little bit different. There are similarities, but there are also some differences. And so I wanted to ask you about, as you transition from college to corporate, what are some how was that how did you make that transition, first and foremost? And how do you when you're in corporate, negotiate some of those things that may be some of your, not that you relieve yourself of those core values you may have personally, but how do you negotiate that when you move from a college setting? You're grown, you're doing the grown people thing, right? You're in corporate now, you're working, you're doing all the things you need to be doing and that you desire to do, but there's also an aspect of you that you have this advocacy work that you want to do, and not that it has to be separate. So you might want to speak to that, how it may not all, it's not necessarily separate, but if it is separate, how do you manage to make sure those parts of yourself, that you're doing the work as well, right?
Yeah. Tiffany, you wanna go?
Sure.
Sure.
So I think so that let me deal with, so that's kind of a two-parter. Let me deal with the kind of the transition first. So the transition from college or graduate school to the work world. Um, because I decided to be a lawyer, there is kind of I was just explaining this to some college students the other day. There are some professions in which there is a standard path that you have to follow for that profession. Um, and I say have to, of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but they're for particularly for early career, what we now call early career folks. So people who are just entering the job market from college or from graduate school. For certain professions, there's kind of a lockstep path early in your career that you are expected to take. So this is true if you're getting your MBA early in your career. Some people get it later in life. It's certainly true if you're going to medical school or dental school. Um, it's true if you are a lawyer. There's just certain ones where you're expected to do certain things. So the transition is kind of built into the system for those professions. Because if you're a lawyer, you're expected to join a law firm, or you law student and you graduate and you become a lawyer, join a law firm, and there's certain things you're supposed to be doing year one, year two, year three, year four, year five, right? It's kind of laid out there for you. And even if you're not in a law firm, you went to law school with people who chose that path and you are seeing what they are doing. So the path is kind of there for you in terms of what the expectation is. The transition, I think, is to understanding, and this is across no matter what your profession is to understanding once again that nobody is going to sit there. No one is going to sit there and help you figure out what you would like to do in your career. So just like I went to college and there was nobody who was going to tell me to do my homework and go to class because my parents weren't there anymore. It certainly was true for graduate school. I chose to go to law school. No one is going to make sure that I'm getting the material or that I'm preparing for exams. I have to do it myself. And then once you're in your career, no one is going to help you figure out what you need to do to attain what you want in your career. First of all, they don't even know what you want, right? You know what you want, or you're thinking about what you want. And then the skills you would need, there might be management training programs, there might be some resources there. Most large companies offer education of some kind internally and training to their employees, but you are the person who's going to figure it out, right? And what you want your career to look like. And I was very focused on, for a very, very long time, relentlessly focused on building skill that was needed for my profession. So I was relentlessly focused on that. And that meant a certain thing for like the first 10 years of my career. So that was the transition. The transition was, okay, now I'm fully responsible for me. What do I want out of this and why do I want it? And early in my career, I needed certain skills in order to be able to get certain opportunities in order to make more money. It was just very clear that that's how that was going to go. In terms of the advocacy part, I've been focused on, I start off in my remarks, I've been focused on young people one way or another since I was a young person, right? So I started a program at my law school that would help and connect students with alumni, and that's still going on. And now I'm working with college students and trying to keep my ear to the ground about what young people are experiencing now and to provide some context, some perspective, some advice. And sometimes they take it, sometimes they don't. But I have accumulated a lot of perspective, having gone through many jobs, gone through now a couple iterations of this thing I do that is being a lawyer. And so I offer that to others. So that's how my advocacy works now. So there's that. And then there's advocacy in my own kind of, so this is the community, there's how I transition to work, and then there's advocacy in my home life. So I'm divorced, I have a child. I had to ask him to go get me a cord. That's what you saw me doing because my iPad was dying. And so I'm advocating for him, right? And helping him think through his future and his life and providing ideas about that, about, well, what does that look like for you in the future? And sometimes that's a fruitful conversation with him. And sometimes it's like, why are we discussing this? I'm 13 years old. So, it evolves. It's different in different areas of my life. But I continue to, of course, be engaged with it.
Yeah, so I can give a quite a different path viewpoint because I think Tiffany for a long time is I think as long as I've known you, Tiffany, or at least pretty soon after I knew you, you wanted to be an attorney. So Kimberly Humphrey, which was my maiden name, had no idea what she wanted to do. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was good at. I knew that because as I said, I always had the ability to speak up. I think I was pretty good at building relationships, but I had no clue. So I moved to North. I did know that I did not want to live in Chicago because I think the last winter I was there, it was like -80 with the wind chill factor. And I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know how other people going to, but Kim is not doing it anymore. So I moved to North Carolina and met my first husband there. And I said first husband because I'm also divorced, but now remarried. We moved. We eventually got married. Fast forward, we moved to Charlotte. I had been working. Oh, I did some odd jobs. I think I worked like at a it was like a transportation. It was a limo service that I worked for, and I was an office manager. I mean, I really, to be honest, and this is why I say, look, it's okay, even coming out of university, for you not to know what you want to do. I think people think I've got to have this plan, and to be an attorney, for sure, what Tiffany says is true. But for folks like me, sometimes you just don't know. And it takes some tries and failures and some fits and starts. And then all of a sudden you find your groove. So what happened for me was myself and my new husband, we moved to Charlotte and I didn't have a job. Again, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. His boss was actually trying to help me find a job, I think like in public relations or marketing or something like that. And then in the meantime, since I didn't have any kids, we had purchased a house. I was like, I can only clean a house so much, okay, and then I'm bored. So let me see if I can just sign up for a temporary firm while we figure out, what I'm going to do. And so, or while I wait to see if my resume generates any interviews or whatever. So I signed up at a temporary agency, and it just so happens that that agency assigned me to Microsoft. I mean, and to be honest, I'll be completely honest. I knew about Microsoft. I knew kind of who Bill Gates was, but I had no clue that it was like this up and coming tech company. So I started there as a recruiting assistant. And what happened was the recruiter appreciated my work so much because I think my initial contract was only like 3 months. And she appreciated what I did so much. And this is why, I'll tell you for anybody that's listening, especially for those that are young or earlier in career, like no matter what the job is, I don't care what it is. And if you're working, you're making an honest living, it's an important job, and it's an important job for you right then. Do your best. We might think, this is just little, I'm not getting paid much. It's not that important. It is important because people are watching you. And someone was watching me, the recruiter, and a Black woman who was a manager there and who ended up being my sponsor. And she said, "You need to come work for us in sales." And that's when she helped me get an interview. And I got my first full-time position at Microsoft in 1997, March of 1997. So, which is why I'm celebrating 29 years there now. And so my transition was very much, oops, I tripped into a job. It wasn't something planned, but once I got there, I realized at some point I realized the privilege and the opportunity I had been given, and I started to work it. I just started to work it. And I think that's, that happens probably to a lot of folks. Some people may major in a particular thing and then they go, oh, I really don't want to be an accountant. I really don't want to be a psychologist or whatever. And they ended up doing something else and they find their groove. And for some reason, I think what's maybe similar for me and Tiffany is that we both took initiative. And that's what they saw in me. That's what the Black woman manager that helped sponsor me saw. That's what the recruiter saw. And they saw that I didn't wait for people to tell me what to do. I figured it out what to do, and I observed like what is seen as value in this organization, and that's where I positioned myself. And what I did was I continued to do that. And you talk about advocacy. So I really I don't know. I think I advocated from the standpoint of I realized the privilege I had and that there weren't that many people that looked like me that worked in big tech. I think Charlotte had probably the most. If you went to Microsoft, we would sometimes go to Microsoft in Seattle, and I didn't hardly see anybody that looked like me at the Microsoft campus there. So that's when it really hit me that, oh, Charlotte is its own little bubble where it's pretty diverse and you see all kinds of people of different ethnicities, genders, so on and so forth. So it started to hit me that being a Black woman in tech and working for a place like Microsoft is something that I need to leverage, and it is helping to put a few little cracks in that ceiling, so to speak, from a corporate standpoint. So I was still low on the totem pole. Let me be clear, but there still weren't that even that many people like me that were early in career, and so maybe that was the advocacy part. And then what really triggered it for me is having my children. I mean, having Rachel, having Alan. Rachel came out the womb talking, and she was always, ahead in school and everything. But my son Alan had autism, and so when he was diagnosed with that late diagnosis at 5 years old, I I was like lost. Like, what am I going to do? And then I realized that if anybody was going to advocate for him, it was going to be me. So that is really, I think, where my advocacy started was with my own children and with having a child, that was neurodiverse. And again, I had to figure it out. And I was still working at Microsoft and still doing some of the other things I enjoyed doing. And let me just put this little tidbit in there. I think being an advocate, I mentioned it earlier on, you also have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to care enough about yourself. You have to be introspective about yourself. You have to be honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you're not. And when you start to do that, and it is a process, you need to fall in love with that process at some point. Took me a long time, but at some point I fell in love with that, and it helped me to realize when I needed help. So I think part of advocacy is knowing yourself well enough about what you do well and what part of advocacy that you can be effective with, but then also knowing when you need help. And so that was also a part of my advocacy. I sought help. I told people, my son has autism. What do you know of any camps? Do you know of any therapies? Do you know? And so he ended up going to music therapy and equestrian therapy and all these different things because I was advocating for him not only with the things that I did and with what I brought to the table, the different normal things that you can get with physical therapy and speech therapy and all of that, but I was also advocating by letting people know I need help. Tell me where I go to get help and I'll go there. And that along with I think with the work that I did at Microsoft, they kind of came together because advocacy is also a big part of advocacy is taking initiative, being willing to like put yourself out there and do the hard thing and look for stuff that you need but you don't even know where to find it yet, and then just keep asking people and telling people what your problem is or what your issue or your challenge is. And then believe it or not, I just believe that the universe, the creator, plug in your higher power title wherever you want to plug it, will bring you what you need. But you have to step up to the table, know enough about yourself, be curious enough, and be vulnerable enough to ask for help. That's also a part of advocacy.
That's good. See, that's why we need a manual. That's so
The
good.
three of us should write one. The three of
Yeah,
us should
that is
write one.
so good. I don't know if anyone have questions, but I have my last question I have for you, and I'm kind of thinking about it from the perspective of a young person.
Mhm.
So, possibly a junior or senior in high school. There's a lot of push. I think this is across the country. There's something that there's a real good. There are areas in our society that people feel like organizations and companies feel like we need to have people in these careers. So we have a lot of career tech promotion that's going on. So some of these fields like, carpentry and brick masonry and plumbers and electricians and things like that. So you have kind of like this career tech that's making a comeback. And so sometimes I see in spaces where young people look like me, there's more of a promotion for that rather than
Mhm.
going to college. And I think that there needs to be enough information so people can make wise decisions. I don't think that you can't, if you're not informed, well informed, then you can't make the decision you need to make. And so my question, given what you know about having a college degree, maybe some advice on what are some things that young people should be looking at when they decide to transition from high school? And what did you, for yourself, what did having a college degree offer you? How did it help you to ascend and negotiate spaces? Um, and what might your life had looked like if you did not go to college, or even if you went to college, but you went maybe several years later. So, just in terms of some advice you would give to young people who are just kind of milling over, like, should I do this or should I not? Or I can get a job just like that. And you know what I mean? I can get a job and start making $20 an hour. Because these are some of the conversations that I hear from young people.
Mm.
So what is some advice that you would give to young people who are trying to make the decisions, those type of decisions?
So I think that you really don't have, let me say this. Young people are not accessing the information that they have access to in order to be able to make the informed decision. So I would inform myself as best as possible. So I would listen to things like this, talk like this. I would talk to people who are earlier in their career and learn from them and what their experiences have been like. And I would not be, driven by 7-second clips on social media because the quality of the information. So we live in the information age. There is a lot out here, right? We can consume information all day, 24 hours a day. I told you I applied for law school with a typewriter. When I was a young person, when I was in high school, television went off at a certain time. There was no more television. There was no streaming, did not exist, and there was no more shows. There was no more movies, there was no more TV shows. And so at a certain time in the evening, there was just no more. And you were supposed to be in the bed, not continuing to consume content, what we now call content. Um, so what I will say is going to college is very, very important. It is not going to be the route for everybody. It's not going to be the route for everybody. I think it is the appropriate route for the students at in high school who are going to see this. I think it's going to be the right route for the vast majority of those students, and here's why. College is going to expose you to other people. We just talked about I met somebody in Chiquita who also liked to read the things that I was reading, and gave me the idea that, oh, there will be other people here, right, who will also like to read those things. And I did not know it at the time, but who will read other things and tell me about those other things that I never considered reading. Not only are they going to be reading things, they're going to be reading newspapers that I didn't think about reading. They'll be listening to, then it was the radio, now it's podcasts that I had not thought about. So I got introduced to people who had very different life experiences than my own. The other thing I got introduced to, this was in undergraduate school, and then later on when I went to law school in particular, in undergraduate school, I learned a different way of thinking. So while I was focused on literature and poetry, all of that is really communication. And that is actually what I do every day. That is what lawyers do, is they communicate. Whether they're a deal lawyer or a litigator, whatever they do, they are trying to convince somebody to accept terms in a deal, convince a judge or a jury to accept their position in whatever they're briefing. When I write emails, I'm communicating. When I'm sending instant messages over Teams to colleagues, I'm communicating. When I'm speaking orally, I'm communicating. Everything I'm doing is really communication focused. And I learned some of the fundamentals of that skill in college. And I've just carried it through law school and then now that I'm practicing lawyer all this time. So what I would say is first you need information. You need some information. This is one form of information, talking to other people. There's information. Get on Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT, Gemini, take your pick and post some questions. I am a junior at so and so law school, fill in the blank. I am a junior. I am interested in fill in the blank, whatever the three things are. It could be baking, reading, information, and football, whatever. Put four things in there. What careers would be interesting to me? What majors in college would be interesting to me, given that I just told you I'm interested in football, baking, information, and whatever else you put in there? And you will get some ideas. It will spit out. Well, have you considered these college programs? Have you considered these majors? There are professions that do this and that. What is clear to me, particularly as I get older, is I was so uninformed. I really just was lucky. I ended up blessed and lucky that I ended up at a college where I could be successful, ended up at a law school that I could be successful. But I really had no idea. I was just talking to someone early in their career who's 3 years out of college, who works at Allstate. I had no idea the variety of jobs that were available to you just because you had a college degree. It just did not even occur to me that there was a person whose whole job was this thing. Like I Kimberly said she was worked as a temp, trying to figure out her career. I worked as a what we used to call temp. Now it's a what's the appropriate word for? It's a placement like service for temporary
Mm-hmm.
workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did that in between college and law school. I know I was going to law school, but I'm trying to earn some money. I didn't know that there was a whole career called business theater. That it just had never occurred to me that it was somebody's job to put on events for large corporations for like their sales teams and bring in
Mm-hmm.
musical groups and bring in the marketing and the banners and all the things that go with having a large conference. I didn't know that you could have a whole not just career but business that is what they did. It just never crossed my mind. I was familiar with the things, that I saw on television, like young people see on social media. That's what I was familiar with. And so I think it's very valuable to go to college to get exposed to other people, to get exposed to other ideas. And having the college degree opens more doors than not having it. Can you make it work without it? Yes, you can. I wouldn't sit here and be untruthful about that. You can, but you have many more doors open to you, many more possibilities if you get your bachelor's degree. So I encourage you to do that. And one other thing, and I know I'm talking for a minute, but one thing I want to add, because there's so much information, but there's so much misinformation. That's the
Mm-hmm.
time we are in. One of the things I see on social media a lot is knocking what people call 9 to 5s, right? So I was just looking at something this morning where it was a younger person. They were like, oh, yeah, because I have to be more creative. I'm an entrepreneur. And in a 9 to 5, you don't have to be creative. And I don't think people are clear on the definition of 9 to 5. I technically have a 9 to 5. I work for a company. This is not my company. I did not create Allstate, right? Um, I work for a large Fortune 100 company, right? Has stocks and shares and is publicly traded, right? That is technically a 9 to 5, because it's not my own company, it's not my own thing. I've owned my own company in the past, but I don't now. And what I want to make clear to young people, as I did to the young person I was speaking to just a couple days ago, who's 3 years from his 3 years out of college, there is a lot of, and let's just be clear, compensation, money to be made in these what people are calling 9 to 5s. There is a whole world of jobs, roles, responsibilities, things you can do, things you can learn, and money you can make in these jobs that people are calling 9 to 5s. There's other things you can do too. You can be a founder, you can have a startup, you can have all these things. And we have some founders of startups at our company. We acquired their companies, and
Mm-hmm.
now they have a 9 to 5, like I have a 9 to 5. So there's lots that can be done, but I encourage you to be informed as much as you can and check the information that you get.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. And I can only, like 100% Tiffany, what can I say? Information overload, right, is what we're getting all the time. And as you say, all information is not, there's a lot of misinformation. And let's be clear, all information is not truth, and all information is not quality. So, yes, please, please, please double check that. The other thing I would say, you made an interesting statement, Chiquita, about because I'm hearing this from all these AI people too. Yeah, right now the best job to get, because AI is going to take all the other what they call white collar jobs. Right now the best thing to do is to be a plumber, electrician, blah 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 blah. All of these more hands on jobs. But guess what? AI might eventually take those as well. Look, my thing is for folks, young people especially, as Tiffany said, you do have to start to learn yourself and figure yourself out. And if I could give advice to anybody now, I would say There are so many things coming your way, so much information, so much of this echo chamber, especially if you're looking at social media. We know how the algorithm works. You know, if you pull up a cat video one day, the next day you're going to get 10 cat videos, right? So make, make it's true. It's true, right? And I know that my phone is listening because sometimes I might say, "Man, I think I need a new blow dryer." And then the next day I'm getting stuff, in my social media ads for blow dryers. So it's kind of scary when you think about it. So you're getting all this information. You're not really sometimes taking the time to really dig into who you are and what you're about. And then you're also hearing the other people telling you what you should be or what you should focus on, or whether you should go to school or not. I do agree with Tiffany that not every school itself, or maybe traditional college or traditional university, is not for everybody. But I would say this, there are so many different learning platforms now. So let's say maybe you're not going to go off to college, like we did, like me, Chiquita, and Tiffany did. But how about going to an online college? There are so many reputable online universities now that where you can learn at your own pace, and you can work and make that $20 an hour or $25 an hour while you're also getting your degree online. Or you could continue to learn from those platforms and be a founder. We know that with AI right now, and agentic AI, and all the different platforms that Tiffany just talked about, I'll start with Copilot since I work in Microsoft. But Copilot and Claude and Gemini, all these other ones. Yeah, there's ways that you can get information from that, but there's ways that you can always you can also use those to come up and put your own business idea out there. I mean, you can right now vibe code and develop your own app with things. So it's really because there's so much. What I really recommend, take some time every day. If you must, take 10-15 minutes a day, sit, think, breathe, meditate. Who am I? And what am I about? Yes, use those platforms, but I also think that we disconnect from ourselves so much. We're so much in this world of information and of platforms and of people telling us what to do. Connect with yourself. What do you feel? And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this guy was saying how there are so many studies out there that say that intuition is really our higher self. It's really usually your intuition is right more times than it's not right. But we're not tapped in enough to who we are and what we're about and what we feel and what drives us and what gives us energy, that it's difficult for us to figure out where you want to go. I think Oprah said that, like, one of the hardest parts to getting to your goal and being successful is figuring out where you want to go. So you gotta be able to tap into yourself first. So everything that Tiffany said, and I would just let and talking about the information and using all the different tools that we didn't have, because all we had was typewriters, maybe a Mac, back in the day. You've got all this stuff available to you, but if you don't know who you are, you got to start with yourself. That's where you start. And then you can start to tap into all these other things and refine it and figure out where you go next. And please, please, please be curious. Get education. Don't let people tell you that you don't necessarily need to learn anything but being a plumber. Always be open and curious to learn other things by reading, by listening to podcasts, by listening to things like this, but also using the internet and all the different ways that we can learn today to get information. Because I'm telling you, in this AI age, that is the differentiator. The differentiator are the people who know, the people who have knowledge. So don't let people tell you that, oh, with AI now we don't have to worry about studying or research or understanding. Actually, with AI, we need to know more. So we don't let that bad boy cause some existential crisis here in humanity. So Yeah, everything Tiffany said, plus know yourself.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. There's a lot there. There's a lot there, but I really appreciate all that you said because it is really about finding out who you are. And sometimes we don't do that because if you're inundated with information, you don't know what it means to be still. And sometimes
Correct.
silence, sometimes it's noisy in the silence because people have normalized the chaos around them. So to be still and settled is actually a lot of noise. I mean, that's why that nervous system is kind of discombobulated, but it's something that young people can you have to practice it, you know what I mean? And sometimes even model it for them in your conversations, but I love and appreciate everything that you two had to say. And I'll do my daughter's on here. She does this. She can't see, but she does this sometimes. That's when you kind of get overwhelmed with just ooh. Because as I said before at the beginning of this, I kind of had in my mind what I envisioned would be a conversation. And sometimes I think sometimes you have college friends or high school friends and you kind of grow apart. And when you do come together, there are some conversations that's not to be, you don't need to zoom everything. But I certainly think there's a wealth of information and wisdom in those conversations. And sometimes we don't realize that. And so I just want to thank you both just for agreeing to do this. And again, I'm recording this now and I'm going to be sharing this with several people so that they can have some discussions. I may even have run the transcript of this and, who knows, using, because I know how to use AI, run the transcript and be like, Chatty,
Knowledge.
Chatty, Chatty, do this for me. I want some questions out of this transcript or whatever. But I do appreciate it. And I just thank you just for being available just to answer these questions. Kim, I know you're in a totally different time zone, so I really appreciate you being on here. And the fact that you two um our experiences, even though we had our experiences in college, just your entry into college and then your entry into career, it was a little bit different, and I think that helps people to understand that everybody's pathway is not the same. And I think our young people need to see that. They really, 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 really need to see that. But I'm gonna stop right now, and I'm gonna pause this. And I know my daughter. I don't know if anybody